Hello y'all, and welcome to a very late but I promise very thorough guide on the dubbed hardest spiral abyss ever. Our main focus will be the gameplay tips and tricks anyone can use to improve their times, like how to properly group and survive the abyss heralds and consecrated beasts, but we'll also drop some criminally underrated team compositions here and there. A good portion of the guide will be done with these forcer teams, since they seem to me simple but effective for a guide. But I'll not be taking healers or shielders inside one, so you can take a good look at how to handle the beasts. Before we start though, let's quickly go over the chambers and what teams are most effective for this abyss rotation. The first half will be our classic damage check. It has multiple targets for the most part, with the exception of the J-Plume in floor 2. The main highlights here are the ungodly high Dendro resistance from both the Dendro Chicken and Beast, and the high-ish difficulty grouping and surviving the beasts. We have just the tips to get the easiest stack patterns from those though, so take it easy. At free-to-play or low investment level, your best options will be within Fischl Aggravate, national-based teams, and Electro Charge. Though with the current Abyss Blessing that helps to shred elemental resistance using normal attacks, Alhaitham and Nilo teams have become decent competitors. I guess Permafreeze is also highly competitive if you happen to have her weapon and Kazuha, and gets significantly worse but still playable without them. Most team archetypes will be playable here really, so if you're having problems getting your 9 stars, consider focusing on getting a really good second half team first, and then use leftovers in the first half. And speaking of the second half, the highlight here will be all of the elemental shields and the fact that the Electro related teams have a significant nerf on them, courtesy of the Electrobird's immunity of course. But moving on to floor 1, we have Cryo and Hydro shields, so naturally what would come to mind is Pyro for the Cryo shields, and both Cryo or Dendro for the Hydro shield. However, it is critical to notice that there are 2 Cryo Heralds as opposed to a single Hydro Herald. And it is important because it makes Anemo characters extremely effective at swirling those Cryo shields into the Hydro shield. Not to mention the criminally unknown Anemo Infusing techs Kazuha, Sucrose, and even Jean can use to save you an entire element check against the Baptist. But we'll get to that when the guide gets to that chamber. Anyways, all of this makes teams like Nationals, Sunfire, really anything you can make work with Pyro and Anemo huge. In fact, Melt and Monopyro are both very much alive in that scope. Then of course we can't forget about one of the biggest winners in this abyss, Burgeon teams. A team archetype that not only includes all of the effective elements against these side shields, but also is highly effective against the Electrobird. One of the biggest surprises on the other hand were Beidou and Fischl though. Both of them apply just so much Electro they can easily take care of any Cryo shield and even make quick work of the Baptist's Pyro shield. While Fischl will need another Electro unit alongside her to trigger her Ascension for passive and break shields, Beidou can actually do it all on her own. Being an Electro Claimer user means Beidou can trigger both Shatter and Superconduct on Cryo shields, and if you happen to have her Constellation Force, she gets an additional instance of Electro Application, all dubs for Beidou. Fischl of course also has an Electro Application buff at Constellation 6, which helps greatly, but she's by no means unplayable without it. Now if you're wondering how to make either of them effective in a side that includes an Electro Immune boss, the answer is quite simply Dendro. Beidou and Fischl both make great supports for spread and Hyperbloom teams, and even Burgeon for that matter. Pair them up with Alhaitham, Nahida or Tignari for a spread team, or just build a Hyperbloom team that happens to include Beidou or Fischl and you're good to go. And with that out of the way, let's move on to the chambers. I'm going to be dividing chamber 1 into teams that have Kazuha, Venti or Sucrose and teams that don't. Let's start with teams that do have these. We're going to start by walking back a little, just enough so that they teleport towards us. We're going to start a setup, do some damage, and once we're sure we're about to clear the wave, we're going to use our Anemo ult. This is going to ensure that we take full advantage of the leftover damage, as it's also going to be hitting the next wave. If the Anemo unit was Sucrose or Venti, the ult is also going to pull in the next wave together, so that's nice. And if it was Kazuha, all you have to do is Elemental skill again. After that, we go to Doritos, and we're going to run to the left side for these. Reason being that it's only the left Dorito that won't chase you, the others will, so if you group up with the left side, everyone will come together. Now since we do start grouping them up in the left side, by the time the other Doritos group up, the leftmost Dorito will already be hurt, so you'll want to focus on the other ones as soon as you can. Moving on to the final wave of Doritos, you'll also want to group them up in the left side here because again, the leftmost Dorito won't chase you, it's the other ones that will. So yeah, we start with the left one again, and after a bit when they're grouped up, we move on to the other Doritos to finish the chamber as soon as possible. Now moving on to teams that don't have Kazuha, Venti or Sucrose, like would be the case with Mono Geo or Nilo teams, this is how we're going to play it out. Similarly, we're going to start by relocating the flowers, but this time to the left back edge of the map. It's important that it's the left side and you're going to see why in a second. Now had we been in the back end center of the map, there's a chance we'd been too close to the middle Whopper flower for it to teleport to us. Bonus points for also leaving us closer to the left Dorito where we will move to continue rotation anyways. Two things to keep in mind when you try to relocate the Whooper Flowers this way are that 1, there can be no obstructions in front of you or they will just teleport back in place, and 2, if you're playing Kazuha Xiao, you can actually be too high for them to actually TP in front of you. Surprisingly enough, Wanderer doesn't actually have this problem. I guess he just doesn't fly high enough. Now, I've seen people play Ayak in this chamber making mistakes that result in the Whooper Flowers flying all over the place and infusing the Anemo Ults in Pyro, so I quickly want to show a consistent rotation that will avoid those problems. Notice that after Ayaka's burst, I don't apply any more cryo, because doing so could unfreeze them for half a second and push them away in the process. Instead, I wait for my first burst to finish them off and then group the next wave as soon as it spawns. That way I avoid getting hit by Pyro and accidentally swirl Pyro in the process. Bonus points if you can get your abilities to hit the next waves as they spawn. Moving on to the next half, most teams are going to want to run back to around the place where the Hydro Herald will later spawn. And as we make the Abyss Mages teleport in front of us, we're going to start a rotation. This will both make it easier to deal with the Abyss Mages as they will be closer together and allow us to use the leftover damage from the first rotation to start dealing with the Hydro Herald. After 3 or 4 seconds of hitting the Hydro Herald, pushing it towards the back end of the chamber, the Cryo Heralds will charge at us, so we run towards the back center of the chamber ourselves, and this will somewhat group all Heralds close to the edge of the chamber. And if we keep our positions back against the wall, all of their attacks will only bring them closer since they will be moving against the wall. Now you might be thinking, if that's the part that groups them up, why don't I immediately run back to the center of the chamber to group them up? And the answer is quite simply because they take way longer. For some reason, starting at that distance will make the Cryo Heralds walk towards you before actually triggering their charge attack, so not only will you be losing your first rotation's leftover damage, but the Heralds will also take longer to group up. Continuing the chamber, after being very careful to dodge their shield activation attacks, most teams will want to focus down the Hydro Herald first. Without the Hydro Herald, you will not be getting frozen and would also avoid getting your abilities cooldown increased by the annoying slowing waters effect. Now, the most dangerous moment in this chamber will be when the Hydro Herald does its spinning wheel attack. So when you notice this attack pattern starting, it's time to be a true gamer and avoid touching water for dear life. But if water does manage to touch you, please don't choose to spam jumps to unfreeze. If you only spam jumps, you'll eventually unfreeze and immediately jump only to get frozen and comboed into oblivion again. Instead, try spamming jump alongside another action like a character swap. Check this out. See, even though this time I get frozen as Beidou and freeze into Xingqiu and still jump, at least the damage taken is shared between the two of them, so the chances of getting anyone killed are way lower. Plus, this way, even the chances of jumping after getting unfrozen are significantly lower. See, this time, I unfreeze from Cookie to all-hate them and don't jump. And that's not the only counter-freeze, anti-freeze tip I have for you guys. This next one I used to think was only an anti-knockback tech, but turns out actually works great against freeze too. Watch. In case you didn't catch it, I swapped characters just as Bennett was getting knocked up, and as a result, reverted the knock up entirely. One more time in slow-mo for the people in the back. The timing for this needs to be near perfect, and if you have a slow connection like me, you would actually need to do it a little in advance. So you might be thinking, bro, this tech is harder to time than regular dash dodges. What practical use does this actually have? And the answers are, 1, you're not always going to have enough stamina or burst to dodge everything, and 2, if you're not sure you're going to get a dodge right, you can always time a character swap right after you dodge to ensure that you either dodge it or at least mitigate the knockback. Plus, it works for freezes the same way it does for knockups. Anyways, moving back to our original run. Where were we? Ah yes, the Hydro Wheel Spin. Since this is the most dangerous attack of the chamber, you're gonna want to remember that while above 1/3 of HP, the Herald will only spin at you 3 times. Below that, it will spin at you 4 times. It works by locking onto the direction you're in when it starts to spin, so you do have plenty of time to dodge even without dashes or bursts. Anyway, since we do try to focus down the Hydro Herald first, usually you will be left with both Cryo Heralds, so let me show you how to group them up consistently. What you're not gonna want to do is to stand in the middle of them. The Heralds have a pretty high chance to step back when they're close to the player, so if you do, you might just end up splitting them far apart and even triggering both range attacks from them at the same time, which, well, you know, not ideal. What we're gonna do instead is line them up one behind the other, because this way we have full control of them. How do we have full control of them? Well, let me show you. When we line them up, it doesn't matter if the closer one to you steps back, because it'll only end up grouping up with the other, and if it lunges at you instead, you can lead its attack in a circle into the other one. The furthest Herald has a higher chance to do a ranged attack, while the closest one has a higher chance to step back, and even if they both lunge at you, you can still just leave them both in circles still grouped up. You can do all of this, line them up again, and just rinse and repeat until you're done with both of them. And hey, while we have the Beidou footage up, let me show you just how much of a shield shredder Beidou really is. Honestly, Beidou and Fischl might as well be both Pyro and Hydra units with how quickly they deal with the Cryo and Pyro shields. They do suffer against Hydra though. Anyways, while we're on the topic of great shield shredders, we need to talk about Anemo's Heralds, and the best example of Anemo's Heralds will be Sunfire Jean. In case you're not in the know, Sunfire Jean is the interaction between Jean and Bennett's Burst. While Bennett's Burst will continuously apply Pyro to your own field character, Jean's Burst will apply Anemo. This of course will result in Jean swirling Pyro from your own field characters, but it's not just any amount of Pyro, it's more Pyro than Xiangling could ever hope to apply. To top it off, Jean's Burst isn't only great because of Bennett's. Jean can swirl any element applied to your characters, so if I purposefully get hit by Cryo and then time her burst's initial swirl, I can swirl 3 different instances of Cryo, 2 from the Heralds and 1 from Jean herself, to delete a Hydra Herald that still had a whole third of shield on it. Not only that, but people really underestimate the range of Jean's swirl. Even though it looks like you're only swirling closely around yourself, check out from how far away I'm still shaving off that Cryo Herald's shield until it's gone. I wanted to showcase Jean first since at the time of recording very few people were using her against shields, but you can get similar results with Kazuha and Sucrose, so take whatever suits your needs. And if you're wondering how this team deals with the Baptist, while my Yumiya can't finish it before the Pyro shield, Jean, Kazuha and Sucrose all can quickly deal with it, using a tech many people are ignoring, but for that little treat you're gonna have to wait till the Baptist chamber. Moving on to floor 2, the Jade Plume Terrorist Room is quite straightforward. I'm just going to divide this chamber into Electro teams and non-Electro teams, because Electro teams will eventually trigger a Fury state that will reduce the chicken's elemental resistances. Before that though, it will randomly do one of these 3 attack patterns. The first and most annoying one will make the chicken charge at you 2 times. If you want to speed this up and be fancy, you can use a few moments in between the charges to direct the second charge against the wall. Careful though, the charges deal crazy damage. I timed a parry with 2 consecutive dashes to get away with this, but you can use bursts, shields, dashes, or any means of survival to replicate this really. If you want to play it safer though, you can just wait around the center of the chamber for the chicken to come back with its second charge and you're good to go. The second alternative attack pattern will make the chicken headbang aimlessly for a bit, shortly before passing out, dropping all resistances. The third alternative though is the most desirable one, for most teams at least. The chicken will scream its lungs out while imbuing itself in Dendro and then pass out, dropping all resistances. It's the most desirable because the time it spends locked in place and passed out is overall longer, which means our window to do damage is also longer. Anyways, floor 2 is the easiest of the 3 and works more as a break room, so try to finish this chamber with your bursts ready to go for the last floor. Now with non-Electro related teams, we're never going to activate the Fury state, so even though for the most part the fight stays the same, things can get quite tricky for Circle Impact, meaning teams that rely on the mobs staying within a certain area to deal damage. Most of the chicken's attacks will make it move in your direction, in which case just try to move it to the center of your circle, while a few will make it step back, in which case you need to make it chase you back into the circle. Ayaka isn't usually considered Circle Impact, but I'll come in handy for Ayaka's Burst 2 in this chamber. Anyways, moving on to the next chamber, we deal with the Thunder Manifestation. After time and time again of hearing people say that the Thunderbird is full of RNG, it's finally starting to catch on that it really isn't. Staying close to it, and I mean melee range close, will prevent it from doing its most annoying attack patterns after its first closing walls attack. So please, for the love of God, don't try to burst to iframe the walls. You will be too late to chase the Thunderbird after, and it will get annoying. These are all the attack patterns that will trigger if you're not within a meter of it for more than a second. That's not to say you can't even dodge its attacks, it's just that the windows to be outside of melee range are very short. At this point it's easy for the most part, just watch out for the few times it could blink close by and you'll be fine. One more thing about its attack patterns is that most of them involve it moving towards you, and if you end up leading it to the edge of the arena, it will teleport to the middle of the map, making it pretty much impossible to chase it on time and triggering its annoying attack patterns again. The last thing I want to go over are ways to actually use the Viridescent Venerer set to shred for Pyro resistance. Being Electro infused means only Jean and Sucrose can pull this off. For the Jean method, we'll need a Sunfire composition. Once our Sunfire starts, we make sure to stay on Jean for the first Sunfire swirl, since the VV set only works when its user is on field. And to prove that it works, check out this damage difference between properly applying it and not. In the right side clip, I didn't wait for the first Sunfire swirl to proc, and that cost me my VV activation. Now for Sucrose's method, we'll need Xiangling's Woba. So this is a crit from Xiangling's raw damage. This next clip is a crit from it with only Xiangling's C1 Shred. And this next clip will be after the famous Woba swirl. Now people seem to think that Woba swirl works by using Woba's Fire Breath, but that is just not the case. What the Woba swirl actually uses is a rare mechanic that infuses Woba himself in Pyro, similar to how Bennett infuses our characters in Pyro. The Woba swirl happens when we use Sucrose's elemental skill to swirl Woba right as this exclamation mark appears on him. This exclamation mark means Woba is infused in Pyro, so you need to time it right or it simply won't work. Now for the Beast Chamber, since the Hydro Beast has an extremely annoying set of attacks that trigger when you're not close to it, you're gonna want to stay at its melee range. By starting behind the Hydro Beast, we will trigger a Tail Sweep attack that will give the Dendro Beast time to group up. Now you might be thinking, if being behind the Hydro Beast triggers a Tail Sweep, couldn't we just spam that and keep it locked in position? And for most teams, the answer is going to be no. Just check out this clip of me trying to do just that. After doing one Tail Sweep, the Hydro Beast will just follow you by turning around once or twice, and before you can even manage to trigger another Tail Sweep, the Dendro Beast could displace you, you could be too late for trying to chain in some attacks as you go about it, and in general it will just be a mess. The teams that can get away with it usually include some form of movement ability in their kits, like Miko and her totems, but that's not the only team of course. Circle Impact and even Permafreeze teams can take advantage of this. In fact, Circle Impact actually needs this. By constantly going around the Hydro Beast, you not only keep it in place, but also make the Dendro Beast run into it a lot, also keeping it somewhat in place. And in the case of Permafreeze, both Ayaka's and Ganyu's teams rely on their burst being able to hit multiple targets. So in order to be effective with them, you need to group the beasts tightly before bursting. So if you walk into this chamber with some energy missing, or if you're in the second wave of beasts with your burst on cooldown, you can use this method to buy some time while you get your energy back without splitting up the beasts. Now, where were we in our original run? We ran behind the Hydro Beast, triggered a Tail Whip attack while the Dendro Beast grouped up, and started our rotation. We are going to dodge the first part of the Hydro Beast's melee attack and try our hardest to preserve that initial position. As we do that, we're going to dodge or iframe the Dendro Beast, and as soon as we can, try to sneak a peek at the Hydro Beast. Since we were at melee range, the Hydro Beast could have only done one of two attack patterns. One of them will make it stay away after the initial melee attacks, while the other is this one, where it will circle back to us with a spin attack. Now if you're wondering what the other attack pattern looks like, it goes like this. We're gonna fight to keep our initial positions like last time, except this time the Hydro Beast will just stay away, so we have to chase it down, and then they group up, and just basically the same thing. Anyways, while you can rinse and repeat that method, with more practice you'll be able to improvise a little like this. Keeping in mind that while they're attacking us, we can focus on dodging and setting up our off-field abilities, and in the small windows in between their attacks where they pause, we need to take full advantage to do as much damage as we can. Now I'll just let this clip finish so you can check out the first method again alongside some improvisation. And by the way, when the Dendro Beast begins to disappear, you can control where it will reappear because it will always relocate to the direction you're looking towards, so you can also use that to group them up. Now to finish this chamber, I'll go over a specific team archetype. I initially wasn't planning on this, but after seeing many people misunderstanding why the beasts were breaking out of their freezes, I decided Permafreeze is probably worth covering. I'll be showing you a consistent setup and also the reason why the beast can break out of the Permafreeze with a couple of clips. First, I'll run in front of the Hydro Beast to manipulate its initial position. This will be important in a bit, so keep it in mind. This following step is optional, but I'll run to the middle of them and quickly apply Cryo, both to later trigger the VV set with, and also because Cryo slows them down, giving us extra time to finish our setup. Finally, I'll run behind the Hydro Beast while at the same time lining it up against the Dendro Beast, so that when the Dendro Beast comes charging, it will push the Hydro Beast with it, grouping them up. You need to do your initial freeze before they start their next attack animation. The beasts will easily break out of the Permafreeze if they're already within an attack animation, so remember to do all of this swiftly. And just to drive that point home, let me show you the beasts breaking out of a freeze precisely because of this reason. See, both beasts were already moving and starting their attacks, and now after using Ayaka's burst, you can see that even though I try keeping the freeze by applying more Hydro, which is already bad because I should be charge attacking on Ayaka, it does little to stop them. Anyways, moving back to our original clip, if you're in Kokomi you can just summon the jellyfish and finish your rotation with your Cryo Burst, but with Mona you're gonna need to trigger the first freeze with her Sprint's Hydro application. This will give her time to cast her burst with the beasts already frozen, and most importantly will allow you to finish your rotation with an elemental skill, which is huge because then you get the most off-field application time out of it with your Cryo DPS. Alright, let's move on to the last chamber. The Baptist is a bit of a tricky fight, not only because of the different elemental shields, but also because the windows to do damage are very short. So our main goal, and I really want to highlight this, is to take as much advantage as we can of those small windows. So timing your rotation to be at peak damage right as the shields break down is huge. Of course with most teams you're not going to be able to take advantage of all 3 damage windows, so don't feel bad about skipping one. Notice that I'm careful to have all of my ults active by the time the shield is down. In case you don't know, the shields will always go online in the same order, first Cryo, second Hydro, and third Pyro. The first and second damage windows will last around 5 seconds, however the window after the Pyro shield actually lasts 12 seconds. Or like around that, so that's the one we plan the most for. This run, my Xiangling burst will expire and be unavailable as the Cryo shield goes up, so I decide to plan for my next damage window to be after the Hydro shield goes down. I start funneling energy to everyone and then try to time my rotation for my burst so I'll be online by the time the shield goes down. I miscalculate but barely have enough damage to avoid the Pyro shield. Now, we know that timing is important for damage windows. What a lot of people don't know is that the VV set actually works on shielded enemies. So when we Surl during its Cryo shield, we're actually taking away Cryo resistance, making our Ayaka ult hit like a truck as soon as the shield goes down. Of course, since the Baptist is imbued in Cryo, we had to shred Pyro resistance before the Cryo shield went up. Now you might be thinking, how will this team deal with the Pyro shield? And this is where the Anemo techs come into play. By purposely getting Kazuha hit by Hydro, and then bursting right before the Pyro shield goes up, Kazuha's ult will actually be infused with the Hydro off his body. It's important to do it before the Pyro shield goes up, because Anemo infusions will prioritize Pyro over Hydro, Hydro over Electro, and Electro over Cryo. And, like I said, Kazuha isn't the only one who can pull this off. Though somewhat trickier, Sucrose and Jean have their own methods. With Sucrose, we're gonna get any character hit by Hydro right before the Baptist shield is gone. Then, we're gonna try to place Sucrose's burst somewhat away from the Baptist. After that, we swap into the Hydro affected character and step inside Sucrose's ult to infuse it. If the entirety of Sucrose's infused burst hits the Baptist, you will only be missing a small chunk of it by the time it ends. A chunk that any other element plus one additional elemental skill from Sucrose can easily take care of. Last but definitely not least, Jean's method. With Jean we're going to need 2 different characters to get hit by Hydro. This is because we're going to need for Jean's burst to swirl the Hydro off our characters. And one character can only generate 2 swirls before the Hydro is off. And we're really going to need at least 3 swirls. Now, in case you're thinking, but why wouldn't I just bring Hydro instead of putting myself through this? Well, 1, it doesn't need to be Hydro, you can replace your Cryo or Dendro unit with Anemo. And 2, remember what I just said about the VV set? It works through shields. So with this method, you're going to be shredding elemental resistances while the shield is up and better take advantage of your damage windows. Plus, remember the Woba Swirl and Sunfire Swirl we talked about before? Well, they also work through other elemental shields, meaning we can shred Pyro resistance while other elemental shields are up. And to quickly prove this, check out the damage difference between using the Sunfire Swirl for VV properly and using it wrong. To use it properly, Jean needs to be on field for the first tick of Sunfire Swirl. Since again, the VV set only shreds resistance when the user is on field, and it's gonna be 53k with resistances down. Now watch as I do it wrong. Jean will not be on field for any Sunfire Swirl, and so no Pyro resistance will be shredded, making the damage go down to 41k with resistance up. Also, here is a damage comparison of Yoimiya's damage using Woba Swirl versus using only Xiangling's C1 Shred. Since I already explained how the Woba Swirl works in our Thunder Manifestation Chamber, I won't repeat myself. So if you skip that part of the video, you can rewind to the Thunder Manifestations Chamber to check that out. And saving the best for last, let's end the video showcasing Beidou and Fischl's shield shredding. Just remember 2 things. Beidou's burst, cast, and perfect parry applies so much Electro they nuke shields. And for Fischl to be an effective shield shredder, she needs a different Electro character, like Beidou in this case, to be her driver. And that will be all from this guide. If you liked the video, subscribe for the next Spiral Abyss guide, and hopefully I won't be 4 weeks late like I was for this one. Also, if you like Spiral Abyss content like the Chinese Championship, I recently hosted a tournament with similar mechanics, so you can expect those videos in a couple days. Anyways, see you in the next video, take it easy, and bye.